Tales of daring seafarers and brave warriors forging paths to new lands with axe and sail are widely recounted, yet few recall the tragic fate of the peoples whose lands became targets of conquest. The events that unfolded in sacred places when Viking ships invaded monasteries and abbeys are particularly overlooked. What befell the women who had dedicated themselves to Christ's service when warriors, worshipping Odin, stormed their sanctuaries? Historical chronicles dryly describe this as plunder and slaughter. But for the nuns and novices, the Vikings prepared a fate that, for many, was worse than death. This is not merely a legend, but a reality confirmed by historical evidence based on accounts, archaeological finds, and legal documents. It is a tragic tale of sacred vows colliding with the brutal reality of the slave trade. Christian churches had always been considered places of refuge, but for 3 centuries, the Vikings defied this notion. They not only demolished walls, but also trampled all moral norms. For them, the church was not merely a building filled with treasures, but a symbol of faith, and the women serving within it were the embodiment of that faith. The abduction of these women was an act of desecration, aimed against the enemy's faith. It was not simply a pursuit of gain or the satisfaction of lust, but a deliberate humiliation, a psychological warfare that left deep scars on the souls of entire generations. Men were killed while women were taken into slavery. Their sanctity made them targets, and their vows easy prey. The capture of these women was a demonstration of power and impunity. Your God cannot protect you. We are masters here now. This account is based on reliable sources, including ecclesiastical records from the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle and a groundbreaking 2020 genetic study of the Viking world, published in the journal Nature, which mapped the genetic makeup of 442 individuals from the Viking Age. We rely solely on facts to reconstruct this tragic chapter of history. The nightmare began on 8 June 793 at Lindisfarne, a monastery on a tidal island off England's northeast coast. It was not merely a church, but a royal monastery founded by St. Aidan, housing the relics of St. Cuthbert. Lindisfarne was a center of power, learning, and art, where the famous Lindisfarne Gospels were created. It was the spiritual heart of the Kingdom of Northumbria. The attack on Lindisfarne struck at the very soul of the people, for the monastery's community comprised not just monks, but also lay people, artisans, farmers, women, and families who supported this spiritual hub. Lindisfarne was a wealthy and defenseless target. When Viking longships landed, the physical and spiritual desecration of the sacred site began. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle succinctly describes the event. Heathen men came and miserably destroyed God's church on Lindisfarne by rapine and slaughter. The scholar Alcuin of York, a Northumbrian teaching at Charlemagne's court, received news of what had happened and wrote in despair to the King of Northumbria, "Never before has such a terror appeared in Britain as we have now suffered from a pagan people. The church of St. Cuthbert is spattered with the blood of the priests of God, despoiled of all its ornaments." He also noted that the heathen defiled the sanctuary of God, shed the blood of saints around the altar, laid waste the house of our hope, and trampled the bodies of saints in the street like dung. Alcuin mentioned the slain priests and the survivors, specifically, "Our boys led away in chains." Contemporary authors, being clerics, avoided details about the fate of women, but their capture was a crucial part of the economic strategy of the raids. The Vikings were not only vandals, but also traders, and people were their most valuable commodity. For a nun from a noble family, captivity meant the beginning of a nightmarish journey into an utterly alien world. Her life, dedicated to prayer, ended, and her vow of chastity was brutally violated. The attack on Lindisfarne marked the dawn of a new era of warfare and economics, where human life was measured in ounces of silver, and the soul of a holy woman was merely a commodity to be accounted for and sold. The captive's journey did not end on the blood-soaked sand of the island, but continued to the slave market, hundreds of miles from home. From the shores of England, she would be chained and sent into the foul-smelling hold of a longship. She was now cargo, no different from stolen church silver or bundles of furs. The journey itself was a brutal ordeal. The weak succumbed to disease, starvation, or despair, while the survivors were delivered to flourishing Viking towns that had become centers of the slave trade. The largest slave market in the British Isles was Dublin, which the Norsemen called Dyflin. Founded around 841 as a fortified naval camp, a long fort, it evolved into the hub of a terrifying system of raids and trade. From here, Viking raiding parties struck at Irish monasteries such as Clonmacnoise and Glendalough, seizing books, gold, and people. The Annals of Ulster for the year 821 dryly report, Ecgbert, king of the English, laid waste the kingdom of the Welsh, and from that day they became his subjects. Behind these words lay raids, plunder, and enslavement. Enslavement, the dark side of the Viking Age. Archaeological discoveries in the heart of modern Dublin at Wood Quay and Fishamble Street have revealed the horrifying implements of human trafficking. These were not merely shackles, but massive iron collars connected by long chains designed to bind groups of 5 or 6 individuals. Alongside these restraints, evidence of the grim business's profitability was found: silver ingots, scales for weighing precious metal, and coins arriving from all corners of the known world. Silk from Byzantium, amber from the Baltic shores, walrus ivory from distant Greenland, all passed through Dublin, paid for by the lives of the enslaved. A nun from Lindisfarne or an aristocrat seized from a French convent became a luxury commodity. Their education, noble birth, and religious status served as additional arguments for increasing their value. In Scandinavian society, they were given the humiliating status of thrall, signifying the lowest possible human position. A free peasant was called a carl, and a freed slave, a lacing, still burdened by obligations. A thrall, however, was property. The 12th century Icelandic law code, known as the Gragas, reflected ancient legal traditions and contained chillingly precise provisions. A thrall possessed no legal status. They could not testify in court, own property, nor did they have a vergild, the price for a life, payable to the family in the event of a free person's murder. Killing a free person required paying their family a vast sum in silver, but killing a thrall merely incurred the cost of replacement. It was considered a crime against property. A master could beat, starve, work a thrall to death, or even kill them for sport without incurring any liability. For a female thrall, this lack of rights extended to her body. Sexual violence was considered the owner's right, not rape, but merely the use of property. Any child born to a thrall automatically became a slave, condemned to lifelong servitude. Capture thus became the beginning of a centuries-long curse, stealing the future not only of the woman herself, but also of her descendants. But not every woman was prepared to accept such a fate. A story from 870 still sends shivers down the spine. The great heathen army, sowing chaos and destruction, was moving south, tearing England apart. In its path lay the double monastery of Coldingham, led by Abbess Ebba the Younger. Aware of the invaders' approach and their cruel reputation, the abbess gathered her nuns. She declared that their lives were doomed, but their vows were not. Raising a razor before her terrified sisters, she cut off her own nose and upper lip, transforming her face into a bloody, disfigured mask. She commanded them to do the same, to make themselves objects of horror, not lust. According to the 13th century chronicle of Matthew Paris, every nun followed her example. When the Vikings, led by Ivar the Boneless and Abba, stormed the monastery, they were met with a horrific scene: mutilated, bleeding women, full of scorn. Rage consumed the raiders, who had been denied their spoils. They locked the doors, set the monastery ablaze, and burned everyone inside alive. Whether this story is true or a pious legend, it illustrates the extremity of the choice faced by these women, a horrific death or a life that, for many, was worse than death. It reveals a world where the ultimate act of defiance was to destroy what the attackers desired most. Archaeological evidence, uncovered by Linnaeus Gardell of the Swedish National Heritage Board in the Viking trading town of Birka, corroborates this grim picture. Among the burials were found human remains whose isotopes indicated that they had grown up far from Sweden in Western Europe in lands subjected to Viking raids. These foreigners were buried in foreign soil, far from the homes from which they had been abducted. The Viking influence extended far beyond the British Isles. Their trade routes, fueled by abducted people, spanned entire continents. An Irish nun, captured near Dublin, might be sold in the local market, sent to Hedeby in southern Denmark, and then embark on an even more arduous journey. From the Baltic coast, she would be transported upstream along the rivers of modern Russia, the Vistula, Dnieper, and Volga. These portages were fraught with immense difficulties. Ships had to be unloaded and dragged overland for many kilometers. Along the entire route, dangers lurked, such as attacks by the nomadic Pechenik tribes at the Dnieper Rapids, described by the Byzantine Emperor Constantine VII Porphyrogenitos in his book De Administrando Imperio. For a captive who survived all these trials, the ultimate destination was Constantinople, which the Norsemen called Miklagard, the Great City, or the markets of the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad. Here she would be sold again, her value increasing with every kilometer traveled. She was now an exotic prize from the distant northwest. The Viking Age, celebrated in sagas and films, appears in a different light when viewed through the eyes of the victims of their raids and human traffickers. The 10th century Arab diplomat Ibn Fadlan, who encountered a group of Vikings on the Volga, left an impartial description of their culture in his Risala. He saw them as the filthiest of God's creatures, yet at the same time admired their physical stature, comparing them to tall date palms. He meticulously described their trading camp, where furs and enslaved women were common commodities. Ibn Fadlan witnessed the funeral of a chieftain, where a young enslaved woman was sacrificed. The ritual, lasting 10 days, was rife with violence. She was passed from tent to tent, forced to drink, and subjected to sexual assault. On the day of the funeral, she was symbolically married to her dead master, then killed by strangulation with a rope around her neck and repeated dagger thrusts. Her body was cremated with that of the chieftain on the funeral pyre. Ibn Fadlan's account is a testament to the complete lack of rights of an enslaved woman, whose life and death were not her own. The profits from the slave trade were immense, confirmed by archaeological finds. Tens of thousands of silver dirhams, minted in Samarkand and Baghdad, have been discovered in Viking hoards across Scandinavia. The Spillings hoard, found on the Swedish island of Gotland, contained over 14,500 silver coins, mostly from the Islamic world, weighing a total of 67 kiyab. These coins represent payment for countless lives transported along the rivers of the East, each one a receipt for a human soul. Archaeological excavations also reveal the truth about this era. A mass burial in Repton, Derbyshire, where the great heathen army established its winter camp in 873, contains the remains of 264 individuals. Among them are men of fighting age with signs of brutal injuries, as well as women. For a long time it was believed these were local women, but modern strontium isotope analysis has shown that many originated from Scandinavia. Research by archaeologist Kat Jarman indicates that women participated in military campaigns, and some were buried with weapons. This suggests that not all Norse women were passive homemakers, but it does not negate the tragic fate of the captives. For every noble Norse woman who died in battle, there were countless enslaved women whose remains have not been found. Excavations in Dublin uncovered the skeleton of a woman discarded in a ditch. Isotope analysis showed she grew up in northern England and endured arduous labor and poor nutrition. She was a captive, worked to death, and discarded like refuse. Behind every saga hero stood dozens of slaves whose labor built their world. For a captured nun, captivity meant the destruction of her identity. Her Christian name was replaced with a Norse one or a humiliating nickname. Her language, prayers, and songs were suppressed. Her faith became an object of ridicule in a world where her God seemed powerless. The psychological trauma was unimaginable. A life of strict order and contemplation was replaced by brutal labor, constant uncertainty, and the threat of sexual violence. Her entire spiritual foundation was shattered, and her body, consecrated to God, became the property of a man worshipping Thor and Odin. This was an act of spiritual and physical subjugation that lasted her entire life. This system endured for 3 centuries, from the raid on Lindisfarne in 793 to the establishment of the slave market in Dublin, the Danelaw in England, and the founding of Kievan Rus. The Viking Age was fueled by the capture and trade of human beings. Its decline only began in the 11th and 12th centuries, when Scandinavian kingdoms adopted Christianity, which forbade the enslavement of fellow Christians. The flow of Arab silver dried up, the great markets vanished, but the legacy of slavery remained in the social fabric, laws, and the very blood of the people. For centuries, the annals of history were written exclusively by men, leaving the victims largely out of frame, in silence. Their names and suffering faded into oblivion. It is widely known that Vikings enslaved people, yet the true scale of this tragedy and its impact on future generations remained hidden behind an abstract notion. In the 21st century, thanks to a new direction in archaeology, these voiceless women have found their voice. The study of DNA has become key to uncovering the truth, rather than excavations in the earth. In September 2020, the journal Nature published the results of the largest genetic study of Viking Age remains in history. An international team of scientists, led by Professor Eske Willerslev, sequenced the genomes of 442 human remains discovered at various Viking Age sites across Europe and Greenland. Their discoveries truly revolutionized the scientific world. They conclusively demonstrated that the term Viking was not linked to a specific ethnicity, but rather defined an occupation, representing a multicultural phenomenon. The most striking discovery was the tracking of gene flow. The study revealed a massive influx of foreign DNA into Scandinavia during the Viking Age. Specifically, a significant flow of female genetic lineage was identified from the British Isles and the Eastern Baltic, directed towards Norway, Denmark, and Sweden. This pattern was even more pronounced in colonial settlements. Viking Age burials in Iceland and Greenland showed that the founding populations were predominantly Norsemen and women of Gaelic origin. The genetic evidence provided irrefutable proof that men embarked on raids and brought back women not as wives, but as slaves, concubines, and involuntary mothers of future generations. The genetic landscape of modern Scandinavia was forever altered by women abducted from places like Lindisfarne. Their fate was not a swift death at the altar, but captivity, enslavement, and forced procreation for their captors. Their story did not end in the flames of monasteries, but continued in the genes of their descendants. Their prayers were silenced, their names erased, but their bloodline survived.